So the conversation about force to vote on the left is still continuing, as it should, because this was a very important moment and it's a very important issue. And the elected progressives who ran on policies like Medicare for All, they had the opportunity to force a floor vote on it and create huge advancements in the movement to get us to single pay healthcare. They had that opportunity when they had when it came time to vote for the new Speaker of the House. They technically had veto power because the majority was so slim that the Democrats couldn't seat a new Speaker of the House without the votes of the Justice Democrats in Congress. And more than that, you also had the opportunity to just remove Nancy Pelosi, the chief neoliberal in Congress, the corporatist Speaker of the House, that the embodiment of the establishment. You had an opportunity to remove her, and she's been the one basically unilaterally running the House since COVID started, and she's been unilaterally blocking policies like Medicare for All for coming up for a vote on the floor of the House. Also the same with UBI. She's blocking UBI from being voted on in the House. She's blocking rent and mortgage and debt cancellation from being voted on in the House. So Nancy Pelosi, now you could have your thoughts about the Republicans in the Senate and things like that. But over the last year, Nancy Pelosi, she's been the sole obstacle to passing necessary policies to deal with this emergency that we find ourselves in, the pandemic and the worst economic crisis in history. She is the one blocking those things. So on top of an opportunity to force a vote on Medicare for All, these politicians, these left politicians like AOC and Justice Democrats, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, Pramila Jayapal, they had an opportunity to impose a cost on Nancy Pelosi for how terrible her and the rest of the Democratic leadership have handled this crisis. If they disagreed with the way that Nancy Pelosi handled this crisis, they could have removed her from Speaker of the House to send a message that we need somebody who's going to take this moment seriously. So they had this moment, they had this opportunity to get all those things, to get anything else that they wanted, vote on UBI, committee assignments, committee chairmanship, all of those things. They had an opportunity to do all that, but they didn't. And we do need to get to the bottom of that. We need to get to the bottom of the fact that they clearly won't fight for the things that they ran on, that the things that they, the policies that they became popular supporting. They won't do anything to advance those policies in Congress. So we need to get to the bottom of that. And also we need to get to the bottom of how there was so many people who consider themselves leftists and progressives in new media who for years proclaimed that Medicare for All is their number one issue and it's should be top priority for the left, and we all need to be working together to do what we can to advance Medicare for All. They've been saying that for years, and then when they had the moment to make arguably the biggest advancement in the Medicare for All movement since it started, having a floor vote in the middle of a pandemic and economic depression, when that moment came, it wasn't the corporate Democrats who were running interference and bullshitting us and telling us and being an obstacle to a floor vote of Medicare for All. Their input really was irrelevant in this because, like I said, it was the left who had the veto power in the speaker's race. They were the one running the show. We need to get to the bottom of the fact that it was people on the left, like hosting new media like Sam Seder, Nomiki Konst, and Cenk Uygur, Anna Kasparian, and David Pakman, who and Ben Dixon, who were, along with the Justice Democrats, they were the sole obstacle to getting a floor vote on Medicare for All in the middle of a pandemic. We can't just sweep that under the rug. We can't just act like that didn't happen. So there needs to be discussions about that. So, which brings me to the topic of this video, where Sam Seder made the mistake of going on Bad Faith podcast with Briahna Joy Gray, and she put him in a fucking body bag. It was, I mean, he was clearly punching outside of his weight class. He picked a fight that he shouldn't have because she really embarrassed his ass for the whole 3-hour conversation. And honestly, I'm surprised he didn't try to rage quit and like leave just to out of sheer embarrassment. That's how bad it was. They had this conversation, and all of the worst qualities of Sam Seder were just on full display. And he's very similar to David Pakman in the way that they argue and in the way that they have conversations, because you can tell that they're just going to be working backwards from their conclusion. They have their position set in their mind, and no matter what you present them with, no matter what arguments you make, no matter what facts you bring to them, they will not change their mind. They will not budge an inch. So it's clear that they don't have they aren't having a conversation in good faith. It's like they just are arguing to win. Like, no matter what is, and they're being contrarian for the sake of being contrarian. And you see this several times throughout the whole 3-hour conversation, where it's clear that he's just moving the goalpost and he's making strawman arguments, and he's contradicting himself and saying, I never said that, and going on irrelevant tangents to change the topic when it's getting really bad for him. And all these different disingenuous tactics to just muddy the waters and distract from the substance of the conversation. Because, like I said, he's just working backwards from his conclusion that force to vote is bad because Jimmy Dore is bad, and there is nothing you can say to me to convince me otherwise. Well, I've been having a real hard time trying to figure out which clips to play for you all, because there were just so many ridiculous moments of this conversation. So I picked about 3 or 4 clips that I'm gonna play in this video. Maybe I'll do another one, a part 2 of this. But first, you all already know the deal. If you can help contribute to the show, I have the links to Patreon and the About page of the YouTube channel. And I also have a link to PayPal and the About page of the YouTube channel if you feel more comfortable doing a one-time contribution. And I'm incredibly grateful for all the people who have contributed to the show over the last few weeks and the last few months, because you guys help me do what I love. So the links to those, Patreon and PayPal on the About page, and also the link to Odyssey, because now the channel is on Odyssey. So go follow me there and watch some of the videos that I upload. So yeah, now I'm going to I'll play the first clip from Briahna and Sam's conversation. Now the first clip that I'm going to play, it is Briahna. This is almost an hour into the conversation, and Briahna asked the question that many of the people who've been advocating for force to vote have been asking the people who are opposing it. And the question is, why? What is the point of donating to them? What's the point of volunteering for them? What's the point of getting them elected if when they're there, they don't actually fight and they don't use the power that they have to advance the policies that they claim to care about, that they run on? And it's an incredibly important question, and nobody has an answer for that, and neither does Sam. So he tries to deflect and change the topic in some very sleazy, disingenuous ways, and I'll come back and break it down. But here's a clip.
Jimmy's perspective, I don't want to speak for him, but it seems obvious to me what he's doing is to be the farthest, angriest version of the left, to create political pressure on progressives to do what they said they were going to do when they ran for office. One of those, AOC in particular, since she's come under focus, said that she wanted to oust Pelosi. She complained just this past January, a year ago now, that it was regrettable that the Democratic Party was so moderate, so to the right, that we couldn't even get a floor vote on Medicare for all. That's almost a direct quote. So what Jimmy's trying to do is say, I don't care about AOC per se. I don't care about the squad per se. I'm invested in these individuals in so far as that they're advancing the interests of the progressive movement and are fighting tooth and nail for the policies that caused us to support them in the first place. And he is willing to become the antagonist in that by being the most ferocious attack dog to push them where they need to go. If AOC were to say, hey, this is my plan for Medicare for all, and demonstrate a fighting spirit, there's no one in this world, I think, who would imagine that Jimmy Dore would just randomly keep antagonizing her for no reason. No, doesn't have a vendetta out against AOC. Whether or not I think that his approach is most useful is a different question. But he doesn't have a vendetta out against AOC because he hates her or something. It's because he simply wants her to conform with her own campaign promises. So I want to put to you, Sam, what is the point of having these people in Congress if, when they have real power to leverage, they decline to do it?
I disagree with your assessment of how much power they had in this instance.
We do disagree that they could have held up the vote for Nancy Pelosi and ensured that she didn't get seated if they wanted to, given the way the voting structure that we just talked about.
They could have gotten rid of Nancy Pelosi by voting for McCarthy.
Well, sure, but they also could have gotten rid of.
Do you think they should have done that? Would you? Let me ask you this.
No, obviously not. So, do you think they should have done it by voting for Barbara Lee?
Well,
and holding up the votes until there was a
what?
Until they get enough.
Do you think that the Democrats? Do you think the Democrats in?
So, I don't know if you caught that there, but Sam is one slick. He's one sly fox. Him and David Pakman are wordsmiths, and they are masters at changing the topic of the conversation when it's not going their way. Briahna Joy Gray asked a very clear and simple question. What is the point of electing them if when they have power to fight and to make a change, they don't do it? You can't answer that because there is no point in giving them all the support and volunteering for them and donating to them if they don't do anything that they say they're going to do. There is no point. Sam knows that, but he can't argue that. So he goes to this completely bullshit straw man. Well, first he says, "Oh, I disagree with how much power they have." And this is like a debate tactic to argue every single point and to get the audience so confused that they just throw their hands up and say it was a wash at the end of the day. So what the point about, I don't know, we disagree on how much power they had in the moment. What is there to disagree about? They literally had the votes to deny anybody the speakership. This vote happened on January 6th. If to this day, January 24th, if they decided we're not voting for the next Speaker of the House, till this day, there would still be no Speaker of the House. That's how much power they had to decide who the Speaker was going to be. So what do you mean? I disagree with your assessment on how much power they had. It's clear how much power they had. It's not even it's not even disputed. But again, it's just a debate tactic. Argue on every single point. Have a disagreement on every single point so you can derail the conversation when it's not going your way. So, and then he brings up this straw man and is like, "Oh yeah, I mean, they could have blocked Nancy Pelosi from being Speaker by voting for Kevin McCarthy, the Republican candidate, to be Speaker of the House." Like, nobody was arguing that. Nobody said, "Hey, wouldn't it be so nice if AOC and Ilhan Omar and Rashid Tlaib and all the Justice Democrats voted for Kevin McCarthy to be Speaker of the House for no reason?" Like, nobody said that. It was clear that it's a part of a negotiation. You're not getting my vote for Speaker unless you give me something that I want. So this whole straw man of, we're going to elect Kevin McCarthy and be scared the Republicans are big and bad and we have to do anything we can to it's feeding off of this partisan instinct that a lot of people have in this country to just fundamentally be opposed to anything that might give the Republicans power. So even though it's been debunked 100 different times in the many different conversations had about force of vote, people like Sam Seder and Cenk Uygur are still trying to bring up this straw man about making Kevin McCarthy Speaker of the House because they know it's going to just trigger that tribalistic instinct in people to automatically be opposed to it because they don't want Kevin McCarthy to be Speaker of the House because they're so afraid of the Republicans. Even though that was never an option, even though that was never what anybody was arguing. So it's clear that Sam was just being disingenuous there because, like I said, it's almost an hour into the conversation. They brought this up already, and he's still bringing it up just to derail the conversation. So now on to the next clip.
Do you think the Democrats in Congress, and do you think the Democrats in the general population, if let's say AOC and Tlaib and Omar and I don't know, Bowman and one or two others, Cori Bush, if they were preventing Nancy Pelosi from becoming Speaker of the House, where do you think public opinion would fall on this?
With them, because 3/4 of Americans revile Nancy Pelosi. That's the whole point.
You think that Democrats would do that?
No, I think
you and I have a different assessment of what would happen in that scenario.
MSNBC and CNN and mainstream Democrats are going to very much side with Nancy Pelosi. I think the American public is going to aggressively side with the squad. I'm sorry?
How many mainstream Democrats do you think there are in this country?
What do you mean? The mainstream Democrats don't like Nancy Pelosi. I'm talking about pundits. I'm talking about people on TV.
Pundits, but I'm talking about when you talk about public opinion, you're saying that all the major vehicles to shape public opinion are going to be against those five who prevent Nancy Pelosi from being Speaker of the House.
Right, but it won't matter. It will redound negatively against them, just like it did, by the way, when the mainstream media lined up against Donald Trump, who still somehow managed to win in 2016. Here's the thing. The media can influence public opinion, but at a certain point, even they have to conform if they don't want to lose their audience. So this is a gambit.
You and I have a disagreement on what would happen in that scenario.
Your feeling is that the public at large is going to say, oh, I hated Nancy Pelosi before, but now we're going to all side with her and against this enormously popular group of young black and brown
people. The public at large is going to be so tired of conflict at that point that the idea that they're going to rally around AOC and Ilhan Omar and Cori Bush because they're preventing Nancy Pelosi from seating, I think that's fantastical.
Okay, well, we have a very, very different.
All right, so this gets to the point that I mentioned at the beginning of the video about how Sam is just arguing for the sake of argument. Like, he is working backwards from his conclusion that forced the vote bad, because Jimmy Dore bad, and then he's just grasping for straws and just throwing shit against the wall to see what sticks. And he's just making all these different arguments that it really seems that he's just pulling out of his ass. And I'm having a hard time believing he's making these arguments in good faith and that he actually believes what he's saying. Because you caught what he said at the end of that clip there? That the American public would be so tired of the conflict in Congress and the fighting in Congress that if they were to see the Justice Democrats holding up the speaker race and refusing to seat the next Speaker of the House unless the Congress votes to give everybody in this country single payer, make healthcare free at the point of service so you don't have to pay out of pocket if you go to the doctor or if you go to get any type of medical treatment. Sam is making the argument that in the middle of a fucking pandemic and an economic crisis, that if the American people see somebody fighting for them to get healthcare, fighting to materially improve their lives, that they just, the context doesn't matter, the substance of the fight doesn't matter, the importance to their lives, the relevancy to their lives, and honestly, in a lot of cases, millions of cases in this country, for millions of people, getting single payer is life or death. But Sam is making the argument that people are they're so simple-minded that they can't tell the difference between fighting for something that's going to improve their life and just regular political theater and partisan bickering in Congress. And then he goes on about how oh, the media is going to be against them if they did that, and all the Democratic politicians and the pundits in the media would all come together and try to shit on Justice Democrats if they did this. And so, all right, let's extrapolate this to its logical conclusion. Sam is making excuses for them not doing this because the media would be against them and the political establishment would be against them. But here's the thing, Sam. No matter when they do it, no matter what the specific leverage point they try to use to get us there, if at any time any politician is fighting for single payer, is fighting to get people healthcare in this country, by definition, they are going to be going up against the entire political establishment, because the entire political establishment is there to defend the status quo of the for-profit private health insurance industry. The media is there to do it, which is why they lie about single payer all the fucking time. They lie about how much it costs. They say we can't afford it, even though it costs less than the private health insurance system that we have now. They say that people won't, like, people would lose they fearmonger about people losing their health insurance, which is a bullshit talking point. It's, like I said, just to scare people, because in reality, if you have single payer, people have more access to healthcare. People have more options of doctors to choose from. People pay less. So this whole idea about, oh, we should people, like, this constant focus on, oh, people are gonna lose their private health insurance that the media does. All of that is to drive down the popularity of single payer. So the whole purpose of the media, because of how, like, Noam Chomsky describes in Manufacturing Consent, the whole purpose of them is to defend the status quo and defend the established institutions. That's what the media does. They're not there to inform people. So that's why they lead the charge against people who are fighting for single payer. And the same with the corporate Democrats. They're there to defend the interests of their corporate donors in the for-profit health insurance industry and big pharma. They are always going to come out and smear and go after anybody fighting for single payer. So by Sam's logic, we should never fight for it because it's going to get messy, it's going to be hard, and people are going to say bad things about you. So, like, again, like, many of the people who are opposing forced to vote, their arguments don't make sense. And if you extrapolate them outside of this specific context, you can make these arguments to never fight for Medicare for all. You can make these same arguments to never fight for anything. So now to the next clip in this conversation.
I think, I don't know what Jimmy Dore's intentions are. Maybe you do. I have watched Jimmy Dore for many years now, and I do remember when he attacked AOC as a sellout for, in the general election, supporting Andrew Cuomo. I don't know what motivates him, but I can tell you what the impact was. And the impact is that, Fraud Squad went out there, and when AOC did not get that seat on the Energy and Commerce Committee, which is a crucial committee if you want to talk about Medicare for all, there was no pushback whatsoever. There was no, and so we didn't have her back there. And in other words, basically,
why did we have her back there, Sam?
They were able to disempower us by not giving us a voice on that committee, and they got no pushback from it.
AOC, the fact that AOC is reliant on her base for her power is a reason why AOC should listen to her base and not Nancy Pelosi. You have it backwards.
I'm not convinced that the base is so big. You have 41,000 people who signed that petition.
Well, which is it, Sam?
There was 100 people out there.
You can't have it both ways. Is it that force the vote made it so that no one had AOC's back when she was denied the energy and commerce position? Or is it that AOC's base is still with her and Jimmy Dore's base
the far sexier story for the media was about, the fraud squad hashtag.
First of all, the media barely covered that to begin with. The lefty media was interested, the internet was interested, but as with most things, it takes a big splash. It takes AOC herself to draw attention to the issue, which, by the way, the only reason, I want to be clear about this, the only reason we're talking about AOC and why she's such a focus of this is because she inserted herself into this conversation in the thread with Justin Jackson. So I think there's been a lot of bad faith discourse about the focus on AOC. I do think there is now at this point some undue focus on her. It's all of them together. And I think that she's taking the heat for the inaction of a lot of other squad members who should also be in focus right now, and people who are progressives but not in the squad. But
right now we should be rallying about getting Katie Porter a waiver so that she can sit on the Financial Services Committee.
That could have been one of the demands if they had decided to force the vote. They could have actually demanded specific committee positions, but they gave up their power.
That would have been a better maybe thing to ask for. I don't know.
Well, Sam, I don't know what you were asking for, but part of the vote campaign I was a part of explicitly said that we were going to ask for committee seats.
That same thing that you were part of was basically saying fraud squad, and I wanted nothing to do with it.
Another example of Sam Seder just carrying water for the Justice Democrats, shilling for the Justice Democrats. So now it's all the big bad meanies who are trying to get everybody health care, and we're calling out the Justice Democrats for not doing what they ran on. Because of that, when they denied AOC the committee seat for the energy and commerce, and then nobody defended her, nobody came out and said that she should be on that committee. And he says, oh, it's important for that committee is important when it comes to single payer and getting it passed through Congress, which is true. But here's the thing. The reason why there wasn't this huge grassroots, the reason why some of the people who usually defend AOC didn't come out and defend her for that committee seat is, one, she had the opportunity to demand that committee seat and she didn't. So if she lost it, that's on her. And on top of that, we don't give a fuck if she gets on the committee or not to fight for healthcare, because we just had an opportunity where she could fight for healthcare, where she could fight for single payer, and she didn't. So the idea that people need to get animated to put her on a committee to fight for healthcare when she just proved that she's not going to fight for healthcare, it makes no sense. But again, Justice Democrats, they can do no wrong. They're always right by definition. And even when they screw you over for the how manyth time, you still have to come out and defend them. You still, when they get shafted by the establishment, we need to come out and make it our priority to defend them, even though it's not their priority to fight for us to get us healthcare in the middle of a pandemic. I don't give a fuck about AOC and her committee seats. If she's not fighting to improve people's lives, she could figure that out on her own. This was a very telling conversation. And it exposed that there is no rationale, no legitimate reason why these people, these prominent people who claim that they're fighting for single payer, there was absolutely no legitimate reason for them to be as antagonistic to force the vote as they were. It all came down to Jimmy Dore bad, and I'm going to stand for these politicians. I'm going to lick their fucking boots. And I'm going to defend them come hell or high water from anybody who is trying to hold them accountable and trying to hold them to the promises that they made when they were running for office and they were begging for campaign donations and volunteers for people on the left. Sam Seder is going to come out and defend politicians denying you healthcare for his own petty personal biases. And it's not just Sam Seder. He's one of the most prominent people who were doing this. But it was no Mickey Cons. It was Emma Vigeland. It was Cenk Uygur. It was Anna Kasparian. And those are some of the most prominent people in left new media. So this is a real problem. And I think everybody who was on the wrong side of forced to vote, I think they all need an answer for this, because their credibility is in question now. Nobody should believe them at face value when they say, oh, we're fighting for Medicare for all, because when the time came, arguably our best moment that we've had to advance this movement and have a floor vote on it in the middle of a pandemic, when that time came, you were on the wrong side of it. So nobody should take you at your word when you say you're fighting for Medicare for all just because you say it. So, great conversation. Briahna Joy Gray is her podcast is amazing. One of the best political podcasts, and she's only started just a few months ago at this point. So she's doing great work. She's doing God's work. And I'm going to do another part of this because, like I said, it was a 3-hour conversation and there were so many great parts to break down and to get to. So just wait for that.